Yep.
Okay, I'm John Wertz, Montgomery County Tea Party, and we're here, we're interviewing Mr. Dan Zientek. He's running for Justice of the Peace, Precinct 3. That's Edie Conley's seat. And we're gonna start off with Mr. Zientek's opening of up to 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm Dan Zientek, and I've been a public servant for 29 years now. Actually, the way I got involved in this was about a year and a half ago. I went to Edie Conley and asked if she was planning on running in this race. At that time, she said she loved her job, she was planning on running. I told her that she'd done a great job for this community, and that if she ever was planning on stepping down, let me know. I would never disrespect her by running against her. It was about 3 weeks ago that she had lunch with her husband, came back to the office, and we worked right next to one another, and called me in and said that she was done. She was gonna retire, and so that's when I threw my name in the hat. So as far as a little bit about myself, I went to Magnolia High School. I graduated, was planning on being a police officer, found out I wasn't old enough to be a cop, so I went and became a paramedic. Since I was old enough to be a cop, went to police academy, and I did both. I worked 48 hours a week on the ambulance, and I worked 40 hours a week as a police officer, and I did that for 12 years. Until I decided to focus on my law enforcement career. I worked at Harris County. My first job was at David Hill's office, but that was as a reserve, so my first paid spot was at Harris County. And then I moved up to Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. I moved into detectives and was a lieutenant over major crimes, robbery, homicide, crimes against children, and sex offender compliance. After being there for 10 years, then Constable Ryan Gable called me and asked me if I had ever thought about leaving the sheriff's office, and I told him no, I was having a blast where I was. But he said that he had an administrative spot to be over his department as third in command, and after much thought, consideration, and talking with him, I moved over there a year ago. So in that, so how this all sort of translates to me running for JP, again, I've been serving the public for 29 years. This is another way to serve the public. It's one of the interests I have. Anything that I've taken on, I've looked at as a challenge. I've done very good at those challenges, looking at how things can be improved. I did that in detectives. I did that in EMS. I did it with whatever job that I've come across, and I've done it since I've been at the constable's office. By nature, I'm a nerd into technology, so I've always used technology to help enhance whatever area I'm in. I look forward to doing that in the job that I'm seeking. In detectives, I have specialty obviously in death investigation. Right now, Montgomery County does not have an ME's office, which means that JP is responsible for death inquests. One of the things in dealing with the JPs for many years in death investigation, I also had the opportunity to work with many of the forensic pathologists at the Forensic Center. Dr. Veazey would tell me that I'm not concerned about when you and your detectives go out. I'm concerned about when patrol goes there, when only a JP goes there, and they don't have the training and knowledge that you have and rule on a natural death and possibly pass up a homicide or pass up a serious crime. So I bring that to the table. Obviously, being involved in law for many years, I've handled juvenile cases, I've handled adult cases. I have certainly handled Class C misdemeanors of family violence all the way up to homicide and violent crimes. I teach for Texas A&M Forensic Science Academy and teach in death investigation and basic criminal investigation, also in crime scene practices. So I teach throughout the state and at state and national conferences on standards in investigations. Right now I oversee the patrol division, the civil division, which most of the civil process comes through the JP's office. Those are my officers that are serving that. That also is handled in the court. Beyond that, the juvenile cases that the JP handles. Again, I work with juveniles. I have in my cases. I'm also served in the student ministry at my church, at Winless Church. Me and my wife have served there for many years, so helping youths and bringing them up. And then the civil disputes between, again, evictions, landlord-tenant disputes, many things handled in the court. Again, that goes through our office at the constable's office, which I'm used to dealing with. And as far as the up to $10,000 in a small claim suit, usually that's two people that need somebody to come in and be a mediator, make a common sense decision to help people out, and that's what police do every single day. Besides that, I have 2 children. actually 2 girls that live with me, 12 and 13 from a blended marriage, and I have a 30-year-old son. So wide gap there. My wife's a teacher at Conroe. So pretty much I've always served the community. I look forward to doing it as a JP. You don't get that opportunity often. Usually if you're doing a great job, you stay there for a little while and serve the public.
Okay, great, thank you. Impressive resume. And you said you worked with children and student ministry at Woodlands Church?
Woodlands Church, yes, sir.
Okay. And you said also that, that our county does not have a medical examiner. Is that uncommon for a county of 500,000 people?
Actually, it was 2 legislatures ago, I believe. Prior to that, if you had 500,000, you had to have an MD's office. It was about 2 legislatures ago that they changed it. It was when Montgomery County was getting close to that number, and we were all talking about this is about to happen, and they changed it to 1 million. So it currently sits at 1 million. So we have some time frame, but that's one of the things that it is coming. This county is growing, we will get there. We always have the option to do it sooner. And that's one of the things that I feel I bring to this office, because someone needs to be sitting there that has done this to work in conjunction with the Forensic Center, with an ME's office for that transition of the JP's office over to an ME's office and have the understanding of what is going on there.
Okay. And do all of the JPs, have they had, probably not the same background that you've had, but the training to do what is required that a medical examiner would do now at 1 million people?
No, so normally how it's worked, and one of the biggest problems, not at the fault of the JPs around the U.S. Here we use JPs around the U.S. They call them coroners, and they're not medically trained. They work with forensic pathologists, they work with detectives, and of course they rely heavily on whatever they found, which is great. And like I said, when they're there. But if all you have is the JP that's showing up, and many times in elderly cases, those cases are dismissed because people dismiss it as you died from heart problems, medical problems, when there's a great possibility that family members have killed somebody, someone else has come in, a caregiver or otherwise, and those are big issues that that training helps in.
Okay, thanks. Maureen?
You mentioned that the officers that you're with right now, they could be coming in and testifying in your court, right?
Yes, ma'am.
How can you make the defendant feel that you can be fair and impartial?
Well, as far as me generally, it's a common thing that I've heard certainly since announcing that I would make a good judge because I see both sides. I'm a very fair person. I'm very calm. It takes a lot to rile me in any way. And actually, I had a conversation with someone the other day. We're talking about jury duty. They said, many cops don't get picked for jury duty. And it's the assumption that a cop is going to go on the side of the cop. And actually what we found when we do classes and things like that is that it's actually the opposite, because unlike a person who is not a police officer that just takes in what the officers told them, well, I know what you were supposed to do. Okay? I know exactly what you should have done out there and all the steps you should have taken. So actually, I'm probably going to be harder on a police officer knowing that you missed some things here versus someone that would just accept what they're giving you.
Do we have some time left?
Yep.
Because as a JP, you're in a unique position that you are allowed as a judge to ask questions. I think almost encouraged to make sure the fair result happens. And
Yes.
so you think that you would intervene, like in a basic traffic case, to make sure that the police officer had followed procedure and had maybe bring up points that the defendant wasn't bringing up?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think is great about that court is that many times when people are coming, they don't have lawyers. I mean, it is the people's court. It is there for a citizen to serve on that court to make some common sense decisions. Many people have asked, well, don't you have to be a lawyer? It was never intended for a lawyer to be on that court. It was always meant for a citizen to be there as a people's court to handle that and to assist those people. So yes.
I'll pass.
Bob?
You just answered one of the questions I was going to ask about. There's a lot of controversy out about JPs actually being lawyers. In fact, there was a bill that was presented, I think, the 84th legislature, where they were going to try to make the changes to do so.
Well, and they, you know, they pushed that in California. Actually, it has gone up to the Supreme Court, saying that it was a violation, someone didn't have an attorney as a judge. The Supreme Court has ruled, saying no, it is always meant to be the people's court. It's always been for a citizen to sit there and to assist, and not get so tied up, entangled in the law and procedures that you are making a fair decision based on a common citizen coming before a court. You know, I feel the same way. It's always been intended ever since its creation for it to be a people's court, and I think that's certainly what it needs to be.
So going back a little bit to the coroner idea versus the JP going out and deciding, you know, as an EMT that we're on the scenes, we decide whether the individual's dead or not the JP, because we don't quit working on them until we know that they've deceased.
Right.
But all they come in and do in some cases just say, yes, they're deceased. There's no real investigation in most of the cases.
You know, it's one thing that I certainly would compliment Judge Connolly on. She has always been very thorough into her cases. She has been very inquisitive. If there's something that we needed as detectives, she always felt, and I agree, that she was running her independent investigation. She felt she needed medical records to answer something, she would subpoena for those. If she needed someone that before her court to answer a question, she would do that. She of course had her detectives' reports, she had her forensic pathology, but she also did her own investigation. If there was a question she needed answered, and I totally agree with that, it is independent. But to answer as far as going to the scene, you know, and I used to tell new detectives, the reason that you know this isn't this is not a suicide, it's a homicide, is you've seen 800 suicides. You know what it's supposed to look like. You know where things are supposed to be. So when you walk in, this isn't adding up. And again, that's become second nature of seeing all that. And obviously doing it 10 years, I've seen plenty of that.
Yep.
Okay, one of the topics that's been much bandied about nationally and statewide is criminal justice reform. What are your thoughts with respect to some of the changes that have been proposed and how that would affect JP courts?
Well, I'm not sure of the specific changes you're talking about. I mean, there's been things of more transparency in what we do and those type of things. So again, I'm not sure specifically what you're asking.
The specific one I've seen most hit upon is non-violent crimes maybe don't require jail time.
Okay. And it is a balance. It's, you know, like right now in Montgomery County, our jail certainly is, you know, getting close to capacity. And there's always that balance between you putting people away that can cause violent crime to you, and that balance between how many do you let out that can't. And so the person that has broken into your house, not a violent crime, if it's their first time, then maybe there are things to do. But after they broke into your house, and your house, and your house, and we let them out and then they break into his house, how long do we keep allowing them to be out there before all of y'all are gonna come forward and go, what are y'all doing? How many times do we have to put them away? So it is a balance between, I don't think just the violence answer. Certainly we want violent people out of there. We want violent people off the streets as soon as possible. Then it goes to, do you build more jails? Is there, you know, reform that you can educate and have them rehabilitated? And certain people can and certain people can't. You know, the sad part that a lot of people don't want to hear, there's some evil people in the world. It doesn't matter how long you lock them up, what education that you may give them. You know, from the phrase of the movie, some people just like to watch the world burn. And those people you're not going to reform in any way.
Okay, do you see, if that does come about, do you see any effects on the JP court?
You know, the JP court is also a balance, but it's different. You're dealing with fine-only cases in criminal. I think that one of the biggest things with the JP court is dealing with the juveniles. It is a great obligation at the JP level to get kids back on the right track, to keep them in school, to make sure they get their education. If they drop out of school, if we don't have the education, that just starts a pathway of so many problems and just a severe problem in society with that. So there's numerous programs to help them. There's numerous ways to guide them. And again, not to dismiss my statement from earlier, there's a couple of them that, you know, they will have problems no matter what you offer and how many times you offer. But, you know, it's not looking at the action. It's not looking at what they did as much as why they're doing it. You know, if someone's missing school a lot, you know, it's not so much, oh, they're being rebellious, oh, they're kicking out of school. Well, why? You know, what's happening at home? What's at that school that they don't want to go to? You know, is it because they're struggling with their grades? Is it because they're being bullied? Is it because there's something happening there, or there's something happening at home that's so severe that school is the last thing on their mind? So it's really working with the kids to try to determine that.
Okay.
Ethics. One of the questions was, how will you improve transparency and access to financial and other records for the public? You're using technology, you're familiar with Facebook, blogs that are out there. There have been some articles written on systems that are used within the JP courts right now. Judge Conley uses, I believe, the Tyler Technologies Odyssey system, and I think the other JP courts use net data. Are you familiar with those systems, and what's your impression of each, if you are?
Yeah, so to answer the first part, as far as transparency and budget stuff, I plan on using technology so that, for one, the same thing that I already do. If you've ever watched Constable Gable's videos, so I'm the one that helps him put those out. Okay, it's important to us, it's important to me that whatever money has been given in the budget, you know what it's being spent for, and you know that it's working. You know that what we've done is improved, and we've used it wisely. As far as stats, anytime that we've gone before court in the current position I'm in, we've always said, this is what we've done so far. This is what we're growing, this is where we need, and I plan on doing the same thing at the JP, is justifying and showing where we're growing, where the biggest need is in the court. To answer your other question with net data and Tyler, yeah, I'm familiar with the argument, I'm familiar with the systems. I'm more familiar with Odyssey. I've never used net data. I haven't touched it at all. I'm familiar with Odyssey because that's tied to the other courts, and being in charge of our property room and our CID, that's one way we look up road destruction orders and things like that. So that's my familiarity with it. However, when this conversation came up, it was curious to me on why we have one here, we have others there. And so I went and talked to other JPs to find out some information about net data, and I've talked to JP3 to find out information about that. It seems to be the biggest topic of conversation seems to be the collection issues. That my understanding, and again, I don't have a lot of research in this, is that one allows numerous companies to collect using the Montgomery County collection system versus a different company to collect. And that seems to be the biggest controversy. Now, my intent when I get in office is, as a nerd, as a tech person, is to look at it, to actually not just the basic part of it. For one, if the girls have been using this, or the clerks have been using this for over a year now, obviously they're familiar. If that makes the court more efficient and they're working with this, why I would change it? Unless there's some massive reason to change that.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to follow
Right.
on that? Or?
Well, I don't know if I'll follow up, but
Oh, okay.
I am concerned about the JP court being looked at as a financial revenue source for the county. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I mean, some people look at it and their concern is that it's because of ticket writing. Okay, that it's like, go out there, write some more tickets, we'll put some more money in the bank type of thing. And don't get me wrong, a lot of money comes in from citations, but there's also money that comes in from civil papers being served, from suits that are being filed, all the court cost. And, the one thing about JP3, there is a lot of money that comes to that court. One of the reasons, you may not be aware, it is the 9th busiest court in the state of Texas. There are only 8 courts that are busier than Judge Conley's court. And those 8 courts actually are in Bexar County, Dallas County, in Harris County, and Bexar, Dallas, not Fort Bend. It's Harris, Bexar, Dallas. I'm trying to remember the other one.
Did you say Tarrant?
I don't think it's Tarrant. And even out of those, like in Harris County, they have 16 courts. There's only 2 that are doing less work than Judge Conley's court. And when you think about all 4 of those counties, all of them have an ME's office, which means they're not doing death inquests. So they're not being called away from the bench. They're not having to go to scenes. They're just working on what happens in a JP office. So there is a lot of money that goes through there. There is a lot of collections that go through there. But as far as it being the basis, and certainly when you look at the numbers, I can tell you that the citations are not at a high level in our county. That is not, I couldn't speak as far as where all the money comes from, if it's from that, if it's from judgments or whatever, because I don't have those stats. But I think just coming from the police side, I know that the amount of citations and things that go through there is not as high as a lot of people would believe.
Wow. I'm gonna pass.
Okay, from one geek to another.
Okay.
Fortunately, I have no experience with JP Court. But my vision of it is that it's pretty much a people-oriented thing. And yeah, obviously technology from the management of the caseload and so forth is a factor, but, and as you stated, 9th busiest court, it's known to be very efficient as it is. How much improvement can you add from a technology standpoint to improve the efficiency?
Well, one of the things, again, and I'll be the first to say, as far as I've sat down and talked to some of the girls over there in their data. I know that there was a struggle with Odyssey in the beginning. I know that as they've been working, Odyssey's also taken from Tyler, another just synonymous, that the system would go down. There were issues with entry. There was a learning curve. So they've sent us to some training. They've gotten improved with that. But where I would see technology is right now I don't see any forms online that people could download prior to coming to the court that would help them fill out their stuff faster. I see the website is not developed other than just Montgomery County. If you go to their site, it's just a very open, click here to pay your fine. I mean, there's some information, I'm not saying it's not informative, but it's not interactive that could provide some services that they would not need to come to the court for. If they're not having to come there and ask for paperwork, if they're not having to have help filling out the paperwork because you have instructions online, those things, take time from them. So, and you're right, it is a very efficient court. Until I get in there, I won't know some of the struggles that they've had to improve. But I look at doing things online, getting some things out there, access to the public. One of the things I'd asked, I said, well, why don't they pay their tickets online instead of coming here? I mean, I know there's that option already. They said, well, many times they just walk straight from the court over. Okay? Well, if there's possibly an option of, I don't know, maybe a kiosk, if there's some type of way that instead of actually dealing with them, that we're able to just take the payment easier and move through that. Again, the less time you type a person, then the faster we can work through the court.
Alrighty.
Okay.
You're gonna come back to me.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yes, sir.
Hours.
Yes, sir.
what are you planning on having your hours of availability or for the JP court to be open? We talking 5 days a week? We talking
Yes.
8 hours a day?
And I had answered a question there that it was, every, day that the county's open, that courthouse will be open. I mean, as far as me being there, it's, as I explained earlier, I mean, I was used to working 88 hours a week. Right now I work about 60. I get there, usually about 6:30 or 7 in the morning, and I don't leave till after 5. And I really don't see that changing. Now, I've always had a hard work ethic where even though I would be allowed to leave after 8 hours, I have things to do. And so, just like now, I'm on salary. It doesn't matter if I work 90, 100, if I work 80, or if I work 40, but I'm there for the whole time, and I expect the same, even though at night and other times I'll be called away, that'll take hours or whatever, there's still things to do in the court, so. That's
Well,
where
part of my reason for asking that is because JPs do a lot of weddings. Some do a lot of weddings. Some make a lot of money throughout the state doing weddings. And I'm just wondering if how would that play, or would you do weddings on the weekends, or are you planning on doing them? And if so, are you going to do same-sex weddings?
Well, as far as the answer of weddings, it is a service provided by the JP. It actually assists our citizens in a couple wanting to be married that doesn't have a lot of money. It is an option to go there to have that union. As far as when to do them, I know right now, she sort of sets a block on Friday. She has a time frame. In other words, that time does not overflow or interfere with court. In other words, if you want a marriage between this time frame, and once that books up, you got to wait till another time frame. That's sort of how it is right now, and I can see that that being the case, not interfere. To answer your other question, which is asked many times of JPs as far as the same-sex marriage, and this was something that I had to take in. Certainly being a Christian and understanding that marriage is a man and a woman. And I reflected back to a Bible passage of when people were trying to trick Jesus and basically said, should we pay our taxes? And he said, well, whose face is on the coin? He says, well, Caesar, we'll give Caesar what's owed to Caesar. And that's sort of the case here. That's the law. I will follow the law as it is. I will do what I've sworn to do, and I will sign on it. But I'm not God. I don't have the authority of God. At no point can I overrule God and say, you know what, you're married. Because it doesn't matter what I say. By the law, I signed this document that you, under Montgomery County, have a union. When you walk out, if God still says marriage is a man and a woman, then that's what God says.
Along that same line, I guess we'll come back around this way. And we were under the other category.
Yes.
And the question was, among the 9 justices of SCOTUS, who did you like and who did you dislike? You had mentioned Gorsuch on his ruling of religious freedom. Would you have any problems in your court using interposition and/or nullification regarding an unconstitutional ruling such as Obamacare and/or Obergefell, even though they are so-called laws of the land?
Well, as far as, I don't see a time that basically those laws are going to be handled in a JP court. Most of the laws that we deal with are local laws, Class C laws, and those type of things. As I said in there, I refer to the Constitution as it is. It's a great foundation for our country. It has served us greatly for years, and I think in certain areas, which has led to interpretation but I think we go back to the intent on why it was created, to protect rights. And with that, that's certainly what I'm looking for, and looking at the people and the problems presented. But just as the same as if I had the option before, maybe I would have an opinion or an option on same-sex marriage. After that is gone and they've decided, no, this is it. This is the Supreme Court's ruled. This, by their ruling, is what the Constitution says is protecting their rights, that we have to follow that, then that's where I'm at, no matter what my personal beliefs may be.
Okay. Maureen?
I'm gonna go back to the fines that are given against defendants in your court. You've got some other options as judge rather than just to give a fine.
You do.
And can you give us some of your insight about that?
Sure, and I really reflect back to what I said with juveniles, that, many times, like them not being in school, finding the parents $250, $500, $100, whatever, is not always solving the problem. Many times, again, there's something going on. There's another issue that needs to be addressed. And also, if someone comes in and pays a fine, and they have money, it's really not a big deal. They write a check, they move on. There's not really a true punishment or a true change in behavior with that. There's many services that are offered. Obviously, there's community service. There's taking away their time, which is our most valuable asset. But there's also schools. If they've done alcohol or drugs, then there's schools to try to help them and understand. Because obviously, most people, all of us at some point, were offered to have a beer while we're going to school. And with the mindset at that point, we didn't understand. You didn't understand the consequences. You didn't understand the long-term damage. You didn't understand the impact that it had on your life. So getting them that education, giving them those resources, and again, my bigger concern is a child that's in danger, a child that is suffering from something and is just speaking out to make sure we get that handled.
Right, and I know we've got a lot of services in the county related to children with CPS and organizations like that. But what about your adult people that come in there that are on hard times and, they did show up because they didn't have the money to pay the fine, now they got a KPS out for them or whatever, there's failure to appear. How would you address that and help them get on track?
Yeah, certainly there's, and it's already in place on many of those things where, there's a payment plan, there's other options as far as paying that, if that's their option way to do. If they want to come in and do community service and help out in some way, that it's not a financial burden. Again, it's their time. Sometimes that's the biggest asset to people, but they may do 4 hours or something that, to them is still a big burden, but it corrects behavior. It's working with people. I mean, not everybody walking to your court has the same financial ability, has the same problems, has the same stuff. And so, no, there's not a one-size-fits-all for every person that walks in. That's why someone's up there to judge and to be fair with people coming in.
What kind of a void is this going to leave the constable's office with you becoming the JP, and with all of your expertise, your knowledge, your training, and everything else that you've had? Now he's without you. What will that do to his departments?
Well, I've always, my goal as a sergeant was to train my person beneath me to be a sergeant. When I was a lieutenant, it was train the sergeant to be a lieutenant. And that's exactly what happened when I was at the sheriff's office. Many of y'all probably have seen him on TV. My partner in homicide and my sergeant, and now the lieutenant, is John Schmidt, okay? And who's a great leader over there. But when I left, there was not a void, because he already had been doing the job. He had already learned how to do the job and step up. So we have people over there that I'm teaching how to handle the tasks that I'm doing. Certainly, my opinion, my experience, and my insight does help in areas. But also understand, I'm literally 2 parking spaces away from where I'm currently parking. So if Constable Gable ever wants to call up and ask my opinion on how something's handled, he can either call or he can literally walk about 15 feet away, and I'll still be there to answer that.
Good, good, good.
Okay, 5 JPs in Montgomery County.
Yes, sir.
What kind of collaboration is done between JPs and JP offices? Is that more, I guess there's more collaboration between constables and JPs than there is between the various JP offices. And which of the existing JP offices do you think would be most like the one that you intend to run?
You know, there's good things at many, and I'll explain that. With, obviously, I would never dismiss, I said earlier, the amount of work that Judge Conley has done. And obviously, I don't know if I gave numbers earlier, she handles about 46,000 cases a year. The next closest one is JP4 at about 23,000, and then it drops down to about 12,000 and 9,000. So to dismiss in any way that what she's doing at court, it's amazing. But as far as working together, and as far as those things, so one thing that has certainly ties her up with the death investigations is she's been very adamant to work this area. Anytime there's a death, she'll work this area, which I can tell you is very time consuming and weighs on you. Other JPs, Spikes, Mac, and Madsen, they used to do an on-call. Same thing we did in homicide. Me and my partner are on call for a week. Whatever happens, we respond to. The next week, they respond to. And for one, it gives you some downtime and helps you to be fresh. And then on the flip side, it's all working together with one another. That's the only thing I know as far as them working with one another at the moment, other than communicating on different tasks. But so.
And the one whose office you vision, if you're going to pattern after one of the JP offices, which one would it be?
I think Judge Conley. I think she's done an amazing job. Again, she's been there a long time. I think that technology could be an advantage in there, just because you know, she's been there since the 80s and is certainly in her ways, and her ways work very well. But I think that technology can improve there, and in using that, you know, one thing that I do with the Sheriff's Department, Constable's Department is, which you may be familiar as a geek, is a SQL report writing program called Crystal Reports that attaches to a database. So I write Crystal Reports for the county, for the constable agency. So many of the statistics you get from the Woodlands and from the constable and everything, I wrote the reports to put those there. I look forward to attaching that program to Odyssey or whatever database is being used, even at the other JPs. You can attach it for net data or whatever to start producing some of the stats, start producing some of the things that are out there. And that automatically can come out and be produced versus a person sitting there and running the stuff.
Okay.
Well, I hope Crystal is a lot easier to use than when I was using it about 15 years ago.
It's not. They intended for a lot of secretaries when we first got on. We went with Spillman, and there are a lot of canned reports, and they said, oh, well, if there's not a canned report, you can use Spillman. You can use Spillman. So we put a lot of people in there. Well, you realize real quick, unless you were a nerd, unless you really knew the program, you weren't just hopping in and writing a report. So
it's not like using Word or something like that.
But again, the thing was, you didn't have to. As a user, once the report was built, anybody could go in and run it. But it was building it that had a little bit of tech to it.
We probably have enough time to go around one more time. Mine's real quick. Do you believe in term limits, and how long do you plan to serve?
I do. I think that as far as to answer you real quick, I could see me doing 3 terms. I think that it takes a good year anywhere to start figuring out your job and really get good at it. I think at that point you start making the impact, start making some changes. I think that so many people have argued that we don't need term limits because obviously we go for election. Well, that's not really a fair assessment, because obviously after someone's been in office, they know the name, they have the money, they have the resources. It's very hard to remove somebody from office. So no, I definitely believe in term limitations. I think that it helps people to understand that while you're there, you do the hardest work you can. You don't sit back. You're always making an impact. You're always making a difference. And I think if you have somebody, we've seen it with many different people, that they get in office, they got that name, they got the rating, and they sit back and don't do anything. so it always helps challenge people.
I was kind of curious about the death investigations. I think you mentioned that the other JPs, they're on call. And so do they take like a weekend, a month or something? Or?
Everybody's on call at all times, okay?
But
So,
I mean, I guess, how do they divide that up?
so they just decided among themselves, same as if all 5 of us were the JPs, I'm on call this week, you have next week, you have the third week, you have the next week, and we're just gonna start rotating. And so I'm not sure when it starts. It may be from Sunday to Sunday. Like when we did it on call, it was from Friday at 6 p.m. until the next Friday at 6 p.m. That was it. So whatever came in. In dispatch, they have a list of who's on call for the JP for those areas. Now, obviously, if it's in 3 or it's in 4 who do not participate in the on-call, then it's just if it's in precinct 3, you call Judge Conley or you call Judge Metz. But if it's part of that and they're part of that rotation, they have that number in dispatch, same as we did in homicide.
And so what is your thinking at this point? Would you participate in the group on call taking turns, or would you continue to do what Judge Conley has done?
You know, the other difference as far as what happens here, which again, so far this year, at least by the end of last month, Judge Connolly has had 800 death inquests, or excuse me, not 800, 700 death inquests. So that means 2 to 3 times a day, your phone's ringing, you're leaving home, or you're leaving the courthouse, or whatever. So actually, I think it would be a benefit to the court to be part of that rotation, because if I'm sitting there for 3 weeks out of the month, and I don't have to leave this court in the middle of trial or in the middle of a hearing to go to a scene because another judge said they'll handle it, then I actually get more done at the court. Go ahead.
Well, I'm curious, are we really having JPs leaving to go do that? I mean,
Yes,
that
ma'am.
doesn't seem to be cost effective, because then they can't take care of the court's business if they're always gone.
It's not always, but yes, they do. And this is coming from me working homicide. If I was on a scene of a suspicious death, a suicide, a homicide, a child infant death, auto fatality, and we called, if I called right now, Judge Connolly, we need you out here. Okay, if trial's on, sorry, and she has to get up and leave.
Has there been a study done about the efficiency of the way our county's doing it versus if we had a separate person or a separate?
ME,
Yeah.
The medical examiner's office.
Right.
So the problem in the big scheme of it is the cost factor. A medical examiner's office, right now, and we have sort of a hybrid, okay? We have the Montgomery County Forensic Center that has 2 doctors. I think there's one that's part-time, so 3 doctors over there. They handle Montgomery County. They also contract out with some of the surrounding counties. But that's what they do. They do autopsy. They don't run body cars. They don't have investigators. They don't have forensic services and technology, or not technology, but lab services. So that's sort of an ME's office when you start doing that type of stuff. It does come with a big cost, so there's that balance between that. Again, at $1 million, we won't have a choice in the matter. We will have to have an ME's office. As far as cost effect to the JP, certainly as you develop an ME's office, the JP can focus on the court cases and the other things that are not involved in death investigation. But as far as research, not so much. And I think the main reason, so forensic pathologists, there's less than 600 in the whole country. So when you try to take 600 people that are qualified to do an autopsy and spread them out through the whole U.S., then having a group of those in an ME's office, they become very limited. So it's not always an option in smaller counties or otherwise. It's usually until you get to the size that we're getting to, or Harris County or Bexar County.
Thank you.
So with the medical examiner, then it would just be their office that would take care of all of the deaths within the entire county.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that would, again, that would free up you to do your job, to take care of the court, to take care of the
All the other.
all the other things that you have to do.
That you have plenty of time for.
Yeah. So how do you feel about various sentences? I know Ted Poe was real great as a
Hold the
judge.
sign out, yeah.
Yes, holding signs out. When you've got abuse cases, or when you've got domestic violence cases and things like that, to be able to to make an impact on somebody, again, instead of the money. There's no shame in our country anymore for the crimes that we commit because we have no respect for persons or properties. Do you think that would help, or can you think of things or ways that, in different sentences that you can do for them rather than just putting them in jail or fining them?
You know, and as I said earlier, I mean, there's some services to offer, and as far as making them stand out there with a sandwich sign or whatever, you know, I think a lot goes back to it depends on the person. You know, there's certain people that there is no impact you're going to make. There's others that embarrassment may work, but honestly, out here, I think we'd have more calls from the citizens about someone walking around with a sandwich sign on than we would for getting that done. But them, you know, scrubbing the floor and doing some manual labor around county facilities, something that they probably have not done because they haven't taken on responsibility in any way in their life, would certainly be some options.
Well, when we were younger, if you got in trouble, you went before the judge, and you can either go to jail for such a period of time or you're going to the military. You have a choice.
Of course, when we were growing up, you were lucky to make it to the court with mom and dad.
That's true.
You were more afraid of your mom and dad. So.
I don't see the sentences coming down to tell people, give people a choice to be able to go into the military anymore, though.
Yeah.
It worked well for one of my brothers. It was a
Sometimes
it was
it
a great
is the best
thing.
thing.
It was a great
It
thing.
is.
Yeah,
Okay,
last one.
softball. You stated earlier that JP3 is the 9th busiest JP court in Texas.
Yes, sir.
Why?
Why? Because of the population in this part of the county. Obviously, a majority of the people that moved in Montgomery County certainly have moved to the Woodlands. It is a very large populace over here. We even see that in the voters, that obviously we pay a lot of attention to.
Aren't the districts basically balanced by population? Based on a 10-year basis.
They may have been 10 years ago. I think that if we were to look at the population that's out there, I think it is very heavy in this area. And I think that that plays a big factor. Because see, now, again, a lot of people, when we look at the court, they think, okay, population, so we're talking about traffic tickets. Well, we're talking about businesses. We're talking about apartments. Okay, we have tons of apartments in this area that we're dealing with evictions. We're dealing with rental properties. We have more homes here. We have more businesses that file suits and handle those things in the JP court that you don't see in East County. There's not a lot of business. There's not a lot of apartment complex, even though it is spread out, and the population may be similar in that larger area. The problems are not the same. And many of those problems do not make it to the court in the civil matter and in the criminal matters that we see here.
Okay.
Okay, that concludes the Q&A. If you want to take up to 5 minutes when you're closing,
Sure.
feel free.
You know, as far as I've said before, you know, I have the years of experience in law enforcement, I have the years of experience and diverse to deal with all the areas that the court deals with. You know, obviously, in looking at my resume, you'll see my crime scene, my death investigation is a very strong part of my resume, and obviously plays a big factor right now. You know, we're looking at, if we wait until $1 million, I think the projected time is somewhere between 10 to 15 years. If we do it sooner than that, it may be within the time that I'm JP, that I'm sitting in that office to make those changes. You know, when I say that I'm the most qualified candidate for this position, I cover all the areas that are in that court. I have always stepped forward to be the most qualified candidate. Funny story to tell, I had contacted Miranda Haas, the emergency management system, because a couple of years ago, they were looking for someone to take a class on the software for DMOR, which is a mass disaster software. We have a mass disaster here. It is to identify victims, to their families, to belongings, these type of things. I called her because the forensic center didn't have somebody send. They called me and said, hey, Dan, will you do this for us? I called her up a couple weeks ago. I said, hey, that software that I trained on in Harris County, have we sent anybody else to it? And she said, no, you are the reason that Montgomery County actually is in compliance with mass disaster protocol, because you're it. So, when I say I'm the most qualified, I'm it, okay? Luckily, I've never had to use it, and God hopes I never have to use that. Again, I've always stepped forward. I've always been the person that if something needs to be done, I'll do it. You know, I can tell you along this, you will never hear me speak bad of my opponents. I think we have some good Christian men that are running in this race. It's a job interview, and I hope that people look at the qualifications. I believe I'm the most qualified for this job, and I think that that will stand out. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming in tonight and for you running for office.
Well, thank you.
And good luck, you know, in your campaign. We're gonna